Good morning. Well, to paraphrase someone, it's 2018, and world leaders ignore the data at their peril. When women and men participate in the economy in equal numbers, we know that global GDP grows. When women start businesses, we know that communities flourish. When women are promoted into senior management and appointed to boards, we know that companies do better. So if we're committed globally to a world that's more prosperous and more secure, it's critically important that we engage women. And if we don't, we're really not using all the talent that we have and all the skills we need to solve the problems that we face in our world today. So again, I'm Stephenie Foster, very happy to be here moderating this amazing panel of experts who will help us really think about how to bring the public and private sectors together, how to create an enabling environment, and how to influence entities like the G7 and other multilateral platforms that provide leadership on the world stage. So I'm joined today by four panelists who I will introduce very briefly before we start. Susan Uthakumar, CEO of Schneider Canada. Marie-Ange Saraka-Yo from Gavi, she's the Managing Director of Resource Mobilization. Arantxa Gonzalez, Executive Director of the International Trade Center. And Patricia Green, Director of the Women's Bureau at the United States Department of Labor. So please join me in giving her a brief hand. So Susan, I'm going to start with you to really kick us off. We're obviously here focused and framed around the G7, but this is a larger conversation about how we really drive economic growth in the private sector and the interactions with the public sector, what you've seen in your role in a very high level position in a corporation, focusing on obviously making a profit, building a good bottom line, how you have seen these sectors work together to drive economic growth and include women.
Thank you for the question, and I really truly believe that you have to have the public sector and the private sector work together to drive empowerment. So when I think about the necessary policy changes that are required to start the momentum, that's clearly the responsibility of the public sector. Now, when it comes to private sector, I think I see this as a change agent. So if you go back in history, if you look at World War II, for example, that brought women to the forefront, right? Because labor was needed. And here we again are in a place where talent is short. So when we think about why we need women empowerment, let's tie it to the business because you want the buy-in of the leaders. And I think it clearly starts with the leader of the organization saying, hey, this is really important, and this is who we are. I think of Schneider, who I'm with, and Jean-Pascal, the CEO globally, he says, we are a diverse organization. We must represent the customer base that we face and the global workforce that we face. So I think it has to be a cultural change driven by the company. And I think once you have that leadership, clear engagement with why women empowerment is important, you have to do a number of things, and I've seen other companies that are really successful do this. One is a clear commitment to the company culture, that empowerment and diversity and inclusiveness is important. And you also have to have flexible work policies because the reality is women will have to step out of the workforce at some point, if they choose to have families. And that's important for society. So as a private corporation, we have to empower that and we have to enable the women to step out and step back in. And I think the third thing that's really important is, women and men are different. We can debate why that's the case, or we can debate it is not. But if it is the case, then we have to ensure that we give the training and development specific to women, and it has to be at the forefront of a company strategy.
And let me ask you to elaborate just on one thing. I think you talked a little bit and touched on the need to really engage talent. And we all talk a lot about that. Do you find that when you're trying to hire the best people, do they look at what your company is doing? Do they ask you questions about how you're promoting women or other, sort of inclusion writ large?
Absolutely. If you look at university graduates today, 65% of the graduate, even in technical fields, are women. So then you ask the question, why don't you see that pipeline come through? If you look at, and I'll speak specific to Canada, 15% of the CEOs are represented by women. So you see what the talent pool is, and you see where we are when we look at the top leaders. And a lot of young people today ask about, what do you do to have diversity? They ask about, what do you do in terms of sustainability? And I see the women empowerment as part of sustainable, because if you look at the future, you want all of the talent engaged and being productive in society, right? So they definitely ask the question. And I think companies that address it and companies that bring it to the forefront will attract the best talent.
Yeah, I think that's a critical point, obviously, as we all talk about this, competing for talent and making sure we have the best people. So we'll come back to that, but I want to turn to you, Marie-Ange, and talk again about broadening it out just a little bit. We know the data, we know what works, but I think it's also important for us to look at the enabling environment, because obviously women are part of a broader set of institutions than just the workplace. And they need more than just job skills. So could you talk about, from your work, what you see as important in terms of creating an enabling environment for women who are participating, so that they can be as successful as possible?
Definitely. I think what's important and what we see that has worked is when really the public and the private sector do come together to address some of the gaps that we see in the enabling environment. So if we take the broader developing world, for example, organizations like Gavi have actually put together both the public and private sector to bring the best of the expertise and the business acumen to tackle issues. Immunization, for example, is one of the most equitable public health interventions, and we see that it roughly tackles both girls and boys. But most importantly, it helps actually empower women, especially at an adolescent age, when it is actually the moment where they need to be empowered, moving from girls to young women, to have increased access to education, to be able to be empowered against early child marriage, but also other health intervention. If I take, for example, cervical cancer, which is actually one of the biggest causes of death in the developing world today, that has surpassed even maternal mortality. What we see is actually one of the biggest issues has been the price of the vaccine, which in countries like here is $100 a dose, which is actually roughly sometimes the income of an individual in the developing world. So what we have done, Gavi, together with vaccine manufacturers, because we represent 73 countries, we have been able to create a market, and the vaccine manufacturers are providing the vaccine at $4.5 a dose. Then it enables these young girls to have access to the vaccine and to be now empowered, to start taking their life into their own hands. Most importantly, what we see is that by getting vaccinated, it's the first point of contact with these adolescent girls with the health centers. Then they can get advice on other things, sexual, reproductive education, other services that are so critical at that time. So I think, the enabling environment is very important. Another example that we see, for example, in schools all around Africa and Asia, we tend to see that girls, are less likely to finish secondary school than boys. Why is that? Simply because in a lot of cultures, when young siblings get sick, the elder girls have to stay home to take care of them. So by vaccinating the children, you increase the opportunity of the older sister to be able to go to school, to then be able to become educated young girls, mothers, who will then also become more aware for their children's health, but also can become indeed much more effective economic agents. And indeed, as we are saying, we do see that actually empowering women, especially in the developing world, can have 12 trillion benefits over 10 years. So it's actually very, very important.
Mm-hmm.
So this, we had this recent study really showing, interviewing 120,000 teenagers in 38 countries, and we clearly see that when there is the biggest gap in education is actually when you have the lowest vaccination rates, for the reason that I mentioned. Whereas when you see no gap between boys and girls, is because the vaccination has been there. So being able to tackle these issues are important, and I think we see that it's happening between the public and private sector when they decide to come together. The last point is obviously technology. Technology can be a very important driver, actually leapfrogging a lot of the issues that we see to allow women to have access to their own empowerment. And one of them obviously is digital technology, by allowing also women to first better know what's happening there, the services, being able to have access to services, but also being entrepreneurs and supporting actually others.
Great. I think I want to come back to technology for everybody later, but you're right, that is obviously the wave of the future, or we're in it now, and we need to ensure that women are part of developing technology, using technology, talking to people who are kind of promoting that out into the world to make sure that everybody has access to it. So we'll come back to that as well. Arantxa, I want to move to you, because obviously there are sort of many parts of what we need to do to empower women economically, ensure that women are part of the labor force, and that women have equal access to jobs that pay wages, that women work in both the public and private sector, in companies large and small, but in also really engaging entrepreneurship and startups, and the sort of women's role in how we build a very vibrant and strong economy. And I know that through the Women in Trade program, you all have sought to really build on that passion and drive that so many women have for entrepreneurship. And I should note that the ITC has a 1 Million Women Entrepreneurs Initiative, and Arantxa told us backstage that they've gotten to 1 million entrepreneurs, and now the goal is to identify 3 million entrepreneurs by 2021. So obviously there's a need out there. Can you talk a little bit about that, but also, again, the engagement with the public and private sectors to drive this initiative forward and the work forward?
Thank you very much, and thank you for having put this spotlight on women and the economy, because at the end of the day, the economy is about improving people's lives. That is about development, and development is, at the end of the day, about peace and security. And we live in turbulent times. We should not forget that there is an ingredient called the economy that, if made more inclusive, if driven in a more sustainable manner, can be also a big part of the answer. For us, we look at the economy with a double lens. We look at the part of the economy that has to do with international trade. And again, I know that this is not a very fashionable topic these days, but we strongly believe in it because we see it on the ground every day, how many opportunities it creates for women entrepreneurs at the base of the pyramid. So for us, it's trade and the base of the pyramid, this million of women, many in the informal sector, that can find a place in the economy and through that contribute to improving the situation in their countries, but also the situation in their families and communities in a much more sustainable way than they do today. Our starting point is that there is a huge market failure. Markets on their own are not addressing the gaps that we see. And let me give you just two of these gaps that are so incredibly glaring. First, out of 5 exporting companies, only 1 is a woman-owned business. And this despite the fact that women-owned businesses are about 40% of the ecosystem of companies in any country. So only 1 in 5 manages to make it to international markets. And this matters because those who trade are more competitive. And competitiveness is better wages. And better wages means better working conditions. And better working conditions means better returns for families and communities. So there is a virtuous circle of which these women are not part of. Second fact that I want to bring to this discussion, 70% of women-owned businesses in developing countries are not part of the financial economy. They don't have bank accounts. They are not, they cannot go to a bank and ask for credit. They are not part of the formal financial circuits. And again, this perpetuates them into the informality, which at the end of the day means not being able to contribute to the well-being of their society. So for us, the facts are there. What we thought we had to do was to put these efforts, bringing the public and the private sector together in an organized manner. Do what any business, and there are many in this room, would do. You first identify the problem, you second set a set of actions, you three put KPIs, performance indicators that would allow you to measure progress, and four, you report regularly on what's happening. So for us, this plan is called She Trades. It's about connecting, as you said, 3 million women entrepreneurs to markets by 2021, working with the public sector to change trade policies, and I'm very happy to say that we got a lot of support from parts of the G7 community in the World Trade Organization Ministerial Conference last year. For the first time, they supported a declaration putting gender at the heart of trade policies, and Canada was a big leader of that, so thank you for that. But also working with the private sector. As companies are the ones that in a way buy, invest, purchase, run value chains, and they can do this by doing what I often tell them, put on your gender lenses. You buy from your suppliers, just ask the question, who is my supplier? And through that, do your business, run your business, but also do good. So this collective effort is what we think we need to do. We've done in 2 years 1 million. Frankly, 1 million is very small because there is 1 billion women disconnected from the economy in the world. So 1 million is small. But all of this is to demonstrate that if we take this upon ourselves, to organize ourselves, to measure progress, to report back, we're giving an incentive to many in this world to join in this movement, and then maybe at some point get the 1 billion done.
Very good. Well, we'll come back, especially on the measuring progress, because I think that's a joint conversation here that we all want to talk about. But I want to turn to Patricia. You've recently returned to the government from the private sector and are working, obviously, in an important part of the U.S. government, focusing on women and the economy, women in entrepreneurship. I know that you're very focused on this, how to create an ecosystem for women entrepreneurs and really look at how to drive the skills needed, drive training and skills needed to do that. Can you talk about both about what you're doing and what your focus is within the U.S. government, but also from your previous position, how you see the interaction, interplay between the public and private sector, and how it can be the most useful in terms of driving economic opportunity for women?
There was a lot in there.
There's a lot in there.
Thank you, Stephanie.
And don't talk too long. No, just kidding.
Very shortly. Actually, it's not a return, it's new. So I've never been in the government before, and I have to say, it's really different. So what I'm learning, though, is how well we can all work together if it's intentional, if we plan it from the very beginning. So I've been an entrepreneurship professor for many years and now direct the Women's Bureau, and working very closely with our partner who's here today too, our Bureau of International Labor Affairs, on exactly these issues that we're talking about. You know, I'd like to center sort of on two for a few minutes. One is about apprenticeships, and then the rest will be about entrepreneurship. What we're really looking at is trying to change the world of opportunities for women, not accepting the current models, and really looking at different ways to approach how they build their careers, how they build their businesses. Now with apprenticeships, one of the things we look at is how do we increase the representation of women in industries where they're currently not working that much. And shockingly, these are the industries where often the salaries are better, leading to family-sustaining types of wages. Our approach, though, is not just to get women into pre-apprenticeship and apprenticeship programs, but to look at those programs and figure out what needs to be different about them in order to best fit with women and their lives. So thinking about things like childcare, safe environments, all right down the road, what's different about apprenticeships. And as a tiny bureau, what we really do is look across all the programs, find those best practices, evaluate those best practices, and then disseminate the information about those best practices. Is how can you really do this to recruit women in and retain them not only in the apprenticeship, but eventually as journey people in the trades. So that's on the apprenticeship part, which is actually connected to entrepreneurship in many ways, because maybe at some point they'll want to start their own business in the trades or whatever it is for which they've been trained. On the entrepreneurship side, we've been working very strongly in connecting that with STEM too. So that's where the connection with businesses and with educational institutions, whether public or private, really comes into play. And over the last year, the government's put out 2 particular programs, both dedicated to advancing women in sciences and entrepreneurship. So for the first one, it really connects women with our National Science Foundation, trying to help women-led companies really look at their technologies and connect the science and the entrepreneurship and help roll those out. And the other I'm particularly fond of, because I'm kind of a space nerd, is working with NASA and looking at how do we get women more connected to the industries that support our space industry. At the same time, I'll admit that one of the things, the conversations I'm hoping to have here over the next 2 days are really about questions like STEM. Because when we talk about STEM, we're often talking about the very highest levels of education, and how do we thread that needle a little bit differently so that we're talking about STEM types of jobs no matter what level of education you have. And they're there, but we don't really have them in the conversation yet. So those are the ways we try to look at what businesses are doing, what governments are doing, what funding is available. But all in all, it's really a matter of how do we change the models of how we work together and how we provide these new opportunities. Really, how do we help women develop their own opportunities, and how do we change the dialogue about all of the above?
Well, and I think it's so interesting that all of you touched on several things that are a lot of similarities, right? The need for us to bring the public and private sector together, to be flexible and respectful of women's lives, to create a strong enabling environment and think about how this is all part of a circle, or, you know, we need to make sure that women are surrounded by other services and have the education and, you know, healthcare they need. So I think it's so interesting how many similarities there are. I think one thing that is always very tough is the challenge to go from measuring the number of women we have in a certain job category or that we have as entrepreneurs to actually measuring impact. And I'd love for each of you to talk about that, and maybe I'll just go down the road, but how do we go from counting to valuing? How do we say we have X number of women? Fine. But then what does that mean? Because I think that's the next important step, to say that this is not just about numbers, but about values.
Absolutely. So it's a really great question, Patricia, because when you look at, Stephenie, sorry.
It's okay.
When you have a diverse workforce, okay, when you have women in leadership, there's been research that's done that says when you have that diversity, the results are actually better. Mm-hmm. And I'm going from memory, but I believe in terms of revenue, you could be 41% better than if you didn't have that diversity. Mm-hmm. And if we sit and think about it, that makes sense, right? When we make a decision, when you have different viewpoints coming, you're going to make a better decision. It's no different for a company, and therefore it's no different for society. And the second thing is, I think that measuring impact, which I think now research is there, we can clearly articulate, and we should articulate because that's the business buy-in on why you need that diversity. Right. The second point is, I actually think you have to measure the current state. So if I look at Schneider, we say today only 22% of the leadership positions are held by women. And there's a specific goal of getting to 30%. Mm-hmm. So you know what the current state is, and you know what the goal is. And I think if you don't have those measurements and the transparency of those measurements, you can't actually move fast in the progress.
Right.
Indeed, and I think, you know, we have to be obsessed with measuring, especially with, I would say even more, it's more than measuring, it's traceability. Being able to know from one moment, you know, when we have an intervention or where we invest to the next step, where does it lead to, what is the impact? As I was saying earlier, we are really in Gavi obsessed with measuring. That's why we actually have these various studies, and we can really trace down back to basically in India, showing that having high immunization coverage in one state and with women can bring another percentage point in education, which then leads to, of course, more empowerment, and then to our entrepreneurship program. So I think it's really this obsession with traceability that is extremely important, but it also goes back to, of course, there are a lot of things out there. How do you define your intervention? And I think that we do need to take interventions that are very effective and that can go a long way in connecting all of us. As you said, from, in a sense, if the type of intervention I focus on is from childhood to adolescent and to education, then it goes on to actually doing this apprenticeship, being able to have training, and so on. So I think, this connectivity and these linkages are also very important, and we have to be better at measuring them.
Mm-hmm.
I want to answer with a story.
Okay.
To illustrate exactly the point that you made, what is it that we want to measure? ITC has an initiative called Ethical Fashion.
I think push up your
Ethical fashion is about working with very high-end fashion houses, Stella McCartney, Vivienne Westwood, Fenley, Armani, the rest, and connecting them to micro-producers living in very destitute parts of this world. These are people living with less than $1 a day, mostly women, but who have amazing skills. But they are simply not connected to the market. So what we've done is build a bridge between the two. The big fashion houses buy the products that these artisans in Kenya, Haiti, Palestine, Afghanistan, and the rest produce in their homes. So we started measuring it because it's very important for us to know exactly what happens. These are less than $1 a day women. Mm-hmm. So, of course, point number one, how many dollars a day do they earn today, a year later? Most of them are above the $8 mark. Many make up to $20. The more they become productive, the more they earn. We started measuring what happens with their children. Do they go to school? Schooling, number 2. 3, what do they eat? Have they changed their eating habits? Nutrition. 4, do they now have health care? But talking to them, and I was teasing them, I was telling them, so what's for you the best, what's for you the biggest thing that you got through this initiative? You know what the answer was? Dignity. Mm-hmm. Dignity. Because now they come home and their husbands or their partners don't hit them. Because they've understood that they are breadwinners. They bring money to the household. Now, how do we measure dignity? Mm-hmm. So we have to also not just look at all these hard facts and all these hard numbers, but also look at the softer social ingredients that make for more dignity in places where it is hugely absent.
Mm-hmm. And I think telling a story like that, telling the stories is so important because it brings it to life. So thank you for doing that.
That was such a good story. I'm going to switch over then to the challenge, and the challenge for everybody here is that, literally something I want you to do, not just challenging you on that, but think about when you're first starting a program, how do you build in that assessment of actual value? What is it you're actually trying to change or adjust, hopefully in partnership with your international partners so that you know what makes sense for there too. But what we're looking at right now is, we're a research center. Measuring direct impact of research is incredibly difficult, but we're trying to look at that from the very beginning. When we start any program, we build in, this is what we're trying to change. This is the effect we're trying to have. And then laying it out throughout the whole program so that it's a total part of the program, not something added on later. One example of something we could look at in the future is, for instance, iLab did a program in Ghana where they provided training, agricultural training in the industry, and worked with women to identify both local and international markets. So there's something you could track down through about, again, it's the income coming in, the relationships they had, those kinds of things. But then again, tying back to the what change did it make in the household? Did I really get to where it wanted to be? And then again, go back to those best practices. How do we actually learn from that and disseminate what we've learned?
Yeah, and I think that it's so important to think about like everything that you said, like starting at the beginning, making sure we know where we are, where we want to go, measuring dignity. I mean, I think all of those things are so critical to this, how we help people out in the world understand why this is so critical to them. I think one other thing that many of you raised, and I struggle with this a little bit because I know technology is so important, but yet obviously like everything, not everyone has equal access to technology. And women in particular oftentimes, or almost always, have less access to technology than men for obvious reasons. You know, they may live in a place where there's less technology. The technology may be controlled by their spouse, their husband, their brother, whatever, if it's a smartphone or a phone. But it's so important. So how do we think about technology in this space with all of that in mind? How do we ensure that women have equal access to the technology they need to drive economic growth? And maybe I'll start with you, Marie-Ange, because you raised technology from the beginning and then kind of go around. What do you think we can do to really ensure equal access or get to a closer place?
Well, I think here again, I think that's where the partnership between the public and the private sector can be so powerful. Just in a lot of, I think, there's, of course, we think about technology, but there's kind of low tech that can help a lot, and of course there's the higher sophistication of technology. But just right now, with the prevalence and the explosion of mobile technology around the world, either in G7, but also the developing world, it really brings a lot of opportunities. And one of the things we have partnered with, actually with the government of Canada, but also with private sector, is really, in a sense, it's very easy to bring access now pretty much to the mobile technology, banking at a very low cost. So now the question is really to be able to create this platform and let women know that these technologies are available and these innovations are available, so that they can use it and have it at their disposal. And we really see great things. I mean, we have women entrepreneurs that actually, because they know the difficulty, have been able to piggyback on these technologies to develop simple things like temperature sensors that are so important for vaccines, or new mobile applications that are so important just as reminders of immunization to help for their children. So it really, so you see very quickly, empowerment unfolding and economic growth at the same time. So I think just on the technology side, and if we don't necessarily have to look at the highest, sophistication, but just on mobile technology, I think, the penetration in a lot of countries, even the developing world, is amazing. And actually, you even see reverse technology, things that are being experienced there that, you actually do not have here. We are actually seeing, drone delivery in Rwanda for basic health services, saving mothers and their babies, and it's only now that actually is being introduced in North America. So I think, because of the cost, and the cost is driving so low, and actually the partnership with the private sector, there's a lot that can be done.
Great. Susan?
So I think technology is a huge enabler, and I think here, I'll speak from the private sector perspective. We have lots of companies with lots of technology in the developed world, and it is our responsibility to take it to those places where they don't have access. So again, if you think about access to energy, which allows you to run a hospital or to educate yourself because you can see your textbook, well, we can bring that to communities. And I think we as private organizations should take that responsibility.
Right. Patricia?
So I think we need to watch for that balance of how much technology drives us and how much we drive technology. And the reason I bring that up is over the last couple of months, I've been in a number of panels and discussions that looked at the future of work and what the future of work's going to be. and they were almost all focused on technology. So I think we need to be careful to also integrate or intertwine in there the conversation of what we want the world of work to be. You know, if it's a values-based discussion, be it local values, but really think about what's the combination of how we're trying to create that future of the world of work and how much technology drives us.
So technology is a huge business sector, first. The
Yes.
ICT sector, it's huge. It's trillions of dollars, it's developing apps, it's moving into artificial intelligence, it's many huge amount of future development, and we need to make sure that women are part of that, and therefore there is a big upstream discussion to be had to make sure that women are part of the engineering of the skills development, that they are not left outside the economy of the 21st century. But technology is also a big enabler of business. And I want to focus on two areas that are crucial for enabling business. One is called electronic commerce. You know, we've run the same statistics on how many, out of this market, 13% of trading goods today is electronically traded. It's e-commerce. And we've done the same poll as offline. How many women are participating in this market? Surprise, surprise. Out of 5 exporting companies online, 4 are women-owned. Big lesson for us. Maybe because when you buy online, you don't know who's selling. So this unconscious bias may not be there. Maybe because women businesses are very small in size, and the electronic commerce is more adapted and adaptable to their business needs. So electronic commerce and fintech, financial inclusion through technology are, from where I see it, 2 very important sectors to embed, to help the base of the pyramid to be part of the economy, the formal economy that is of the 21st century.
Well, we're coming to the end of our panel, so we have time for one more question, and really focusing us on the G7. And I guess we could say the G7, the G19 or 20, all these international institutions, but focusing on the G7. What's the one thing you would like them, the leaders of the G7, to take away from this discussion and really implement in terms of what the G7 is doing? I will say, as someone who worked on the G7 when I was at the State Department, I think the G7 has come a very long way and is a very big leader in really wanting to push forward. So I think it's a very open platform for this discussion. So I'm going to start with Patricia and move this way. What would you like the G7 to do as it works on how to increase opportunity and access for women to economic opportunities around the world?
Well, when we practiced this, I said I was going to focus on entrepreneurship. I'm going to switch just a little bit and say, I'd ask for a real focus on innovation. Remembering that innovation is not just about the newest products or services, but it's also about how we do business and how we work together, and not just replicate existing models. Really looking at, especially through entrepreneurship, if we're going to create new companies, how do we create new and better ways to work together inside the company and across companies? So right now my theme is kind of change the model, change the dialogue.
So the G7 should preach with the example. So no feel good, but rather tracking change. Track change. Tell us what you've been able to change. That's what I would ask the G7 to do, because it's very important that we don't just keep this as a feel-good conversation, but that we are capable of ensuring change on the ground. So tell us what you're doing, is what I would ask the G7 to do.
So what I will ask the G7 to do, I think, the topic of security is a very important one, but it has actually not to forget that it's linked to empowering women. Innovation there is key, and I think it's great to see that countries like Canada, for example, have decided to embrace this very recently. But much more has to be done there, actually to keep the track on this innovation, on women empowerment, and thinking that
Can people hear? Go ahead.
So I saw this stat yesterday that of the 900 million people who are illiterate in the world, 2/3 are women. And that 70% of the people that we consider poor, so people who live in $1 a day, are women. I think that's a stat that we should not accept, and we have a responsibility through the G7 or through the G19 to say that's not in the betterment of society. So this agenda has to be at the forefront, and they have to be courageous in driving actual change and speaking to the change and measuring that change.
Well, and I would agree with all of you. I mean, taking the prerogative here as the moderator, I mean, I feel strongly that one of the most important things is to link this discussion to security, right? To say this is part of our effort to create a more prosperous, stable, and secure world. And without jobs and innovation, we impede ourselves from doing that. And I think that's one of the most critical things that this panel has really reflected for all of us, is that this is about unleashing tremendous potential in the world. It's about bringing to bear all these great minds and thoughts to solve our problems. And obviously we need that. We live in an incredibly complex world with a lot of challenges. And I think if we don't include women, if we don't include the most diverse group of people possible in the economy, in our political system, in our peace negotiations, we fail. And this is so important to show what we've learned that can work. So I really want to thank all of you for being part of this really amazing panel to open up the discussion today and for today and tomorrow here at the forum. I should also say, please, if you're, I know you know this, but please tweet. Please use social media. The hashtag is WFG7, which is at the bottom of the screen, and I'm sure you've been tweeting away, but keep doing it for the time we're here so we can continue to get the word out to people who are watching about the critical importance of the public and private sectors working together to advance women's economic opportunity and empowerment across the globe. So I want to thank you all very much. I especially want to thank our panelists, and I'd ask you to join me in giving them a round of applause, and thank you for listening.